Okay, so now I'm going to read back in the chat and actually see what folks were saying to me during my giant one-person rant about The Last of Us 2. So, Not Jim Artist says, I'm sorry, Jeff. I've been informed that liking this game makes you evil. So, yeah, unfortunately, the phenomenon that this game is about, which is about people taking sides, not imagining the people on the other side as human beings like themselves, being willing to just open up and do anything, whatever it takes to win and to destroy the opposition. The thing that this game is about not doing is exactly what people are doing to this game. And it just feels so much like people are missing the point. It feels so much like, if somebody plays The Last of Us 2 and then gets irrationally angry at a camp of other people that they disagree with and sends them death threats and tries to physically intimidate them into not being this way anymore. Did they even play this game? Do they understand what this game is saying? Like, I just, or even the first game, what it was saying. Like, I just don't even understand that point of view. How can you miss the point so completely? It doesn't work for me. I should mention the Nightwing channel on YouTube before that message asked me if I played the first Last of Us, and I think I made it pretty clear throughout the thing that yes, I did. It was one of my favorite games of that year, and now 7 years later, this is probably my favorite game of this year. Everyone else, I mean, I know we're only halfway through the year, but everyone else has a really huge bar to clear. Yeah, so Silence Party says, there are parts of this game that could have been better in my opinion, but social media turns everything into black and white contrast. And yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, like, people, like, there's so many things in this world that have nuance, right? Where, you can look at any game and it's got positives and negatives. Any movie, it's got positives and negatives. Even political factions, there isn't a political faction that doesn't desire to do good to some degree or another. No one is a mustache twirling villain. At least no group of people above a certain size is entirely made out of mustache twirling villains. Someone is misunderstanding something, even if they're the worst. Someone is a decent person who doesn't understand, or someone in a group is a person who wants something good and maybe is going about it in a wrong way. There's a lot of different ways that people can be, and like trying to say that an entire group of people is just horrible, and like say the world is divided into divided right down the middle, and people on this side are amazing and people on this side are the worst, and we need to destroy all of these people. It just doesn't make any sense, and like this game is about realizing that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, so folks are continuing to riff on that whole thing. Not Jim Artist says the mob has spoken, and Silence Party found that pretty funny. And then while I was talking about production values and how games are able to games of this scope are able to be made, Not Jim Artist says this explains how Assassin's Creed 3 got made, and and everything. Like, yeah, the whole Assassin's Creed franchise is in that same category of games that have ridiculous scope and ridiculous production values, because they know, I mean, it's one of the most popular franchises in the world. You look at Assassin's Creed 1, it was pretty ambitious. It had a pretty big budget, but it had its limits. I mean, there were a lot of things that it sort of barely did, things that it hinted at, that it didn't go nearly as far as featured Assassin's Creed games. But because that game was so popular and had such a good reputation, that they were able to make Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood and all this, and they were able to put more and more resources into it because they knew people were going to buy it in large numbers. And when people are going to buy a game in large numbers, you can devote more to it up front to make it better. And so it's something that's sort of like, you have to start small, but then you can build and build and build with sequels as you get sort of a reliable audience. And then as that audience flags, then you kind of have to almost like abandon a franchise, because you can't make a sequel that has lower production values as the previous game, but if the audience is shrinking, that's your only option. You can't just, yeah. So, anyway, let's see here. Apparently I said something that made Not Jim Artist say that I was pro mass murder. And I'm not sure exactly what it was I could have said that would have caused that, but whatever. I'm sure I said something awkward. Oh yeah, so Eddie says that he doesn't plan on playing this game. He didn't play the first game, and that's fine. Again, like, this game is not typically the type of game that I consider my favorite. It stands, because of the sheer ridiculous, over-the-top artistry. Like, it's able to win me over, despite the fact that normally big, high production values cinematic games are not the thing that I'm super into. This one makes it work. Um, let's see here. Let's see here. Silence Party says, I'd recommend watching XQC's stream with the chat turned off. The gameplay loop is iffy. The story is what matters. So I'm not sure. Let's see here. If you're talking about, you're probably talking about somebody who plays The Last of Us 2. And yeah, with the chat turned off makes almost anything in this world better, with the exception of my chat, who are all brilliant, and I love you all. But there's anytime you're watching any big time streamer or any like big public stream that's just got millions of people in the chat, most of what's being said is just attention seeking garbage, and so or it's fueled by some of this these like weird rivalries and hatreds, and it's just not really worth paying attention to. And yeah. So Not Jim Artist points out that that as much as I disapprove of Joel's choices, he suspects that I would probably do uncomfortable things to keep one of my kids safe. And that might easily be true. I mean, definitely, if somebody put the potential loss of a child up in front of me, it would be very hard for me to do anything just but react viscerally and emotionally to that. But at the same time, as an outside observer, I would hope that I would that either I would be restrained from doing something terrible as a result of those feelings, or that I would fail, because the last thing the world needs is for me to is for someone to compound terrible things with more terrible things. Now, I think justice is really important. I think that like if somebody does something terrible, at the very least you need to restrain them from being able to do it again by some means. And in a world like The Last of Us, I mean, sometimes when we live in a world where we can afford big, massive jails, the best thing to do is to take people and put them in that when they're too dangerous to be trusted among normal society. In a world like The Last of Us, where you can't afford prisons and you can't keep up with people, and if you just exile someone, they could come back and murder you in your sleep. I understand. Capital punishment makes sense in a world like that. It's kind of the only alternative when someone is a threat, a genuine threat to you and everyone you care about. And so again, Abby, her going after Joel, I kind of understand that. He wasn't really a threat to her, and so it's not 100% justified, but, that kind of frontier justice, you can justify it in a world like this. But at some point it has to stop. You can't just keep escalating it forever, or just everyone's dead. And that's like, obviously, pragmatically you can't do that. Even if you're not thinking morally, pragmatically you can't do that. And so, so you, at some point someone has to put a stop to it. And I hope that a stop would be made, even if I was involved in something like that. All right, so yeah, so again, as I was talking about, people, getting into conflicts with people online about stuff like this, I definitely, at one point, I think I might have missed it here, but I know that at some point, Not Jim Artist said that when people do things like send death threats to voice actors about the story of the game, or to actors of any kind, I just like. He says they deserve a beatdown, and he volunteers. Again, I'm not in favor of cycles of violence, but definitely, I mean, you completely invalidate yourself as a judge of anyone else if you are doing things like that. Like, obviously, you are the bad guy in that situation. Doesn't matter what somebody else did to disappoint you. If you are the one sending the death threats, you are the bad guy, and now you are wronger than they could possibly be. I mean, that's true. Whether you're talking about Kelly Marie Tran, whether you're talking about, I have spaced on the name of the voice actress who plays Abby, but her, don't do this to people. Number one, actors didn't write the story, so just leave them the crap alone. And then, second of all, also don't do it to the writers. They're just writing a story. They didn't hurt you. It's fine. You don't like it? There's lots of stories in the world that I don't like. I don't hate the people who created them. I didn't, there were some people who were like dancing on Joel Schumacher's grave because they didn't like Batman and Robin. And I'm just like, okay, I didn't like Batman and Robin. I was mystified that, when the entire city of Gotham is going to die in 5 minutes, everyone does a costume change. That doesn't make any sense. Also, that's a human being who died. Like, seriously. I don't care if he only made bad movies his entire life. And he didn't. He made some great ones. I don't care if he only made bad movies his entire life. He's a human being. Show some respect, So, Anyway, uh, yeah. So not Jim Artist says, things about, like what I said, when you start losing your audience, it becomes impossible to make a game of a certain scale. He cites, Mass Effect Andromeda as being an example of that, where it's like, the cost of making the game kept escalating and escalating, but when you have one entry in the franchise that has a smaller audience, the entire franchise can take a nosedive. And I don't think that was Andromeda's fault. Honestly, if anything, I think it was probably the reception of the ending of of Mass Effect 3 that probably harpooned Andromeda's chances. Andromeda had its problems; they weren't that actually big of a deal. I haven't played the game yet, but I've seen what people were complaining about, and I'm just like, I mean, I'm sorry. I've seen lots of games. I love lots of games with way worse problems than Andromeda had. But once you have any entry in a franchise that starts to sort of undermine your audience, you're messed up. So, and actually, you know what? The Mass Effect 3 is a really good example. I really hated the story decisions they made at the end of Mass Effect 3. I felt like they completely undermined the experience I had been having up to that point. There was no point where I would even have considered sending personal hate to anyone on that team. They clearly were grappling with a very difficult problem. They had two massive games. And Mass Effect 2 was one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time, and they had to follow that. And they felt like, we have to please everyone. Everyone will be so mad at us if we mess up. And I think they were trying to come up with an ending that would please everyone. And I think that what they did failed. But I understand the motivation. I know why they made a sort of very cautious, conservative choice in the ending of their game, because there was so much writing on it. And it's really easy to make a mistake like that. And I've made lots of mistakes in the games that I've worked on, and all of them were well-meaning. I intended for it to be great every single time I made a mistake. And some of them were very legitimate mistakes, and people are disappointed, and I understand. And so I'm like, I'm not going to direct hate at them for that. They tried to make something great. I felt like it didn't work, but they're still human beings, and I still care about them, and I want them to be happy, and I want them to be successful. And I think the next thing that many of those people did was successful, because they're still awesome. And so, yeah, anyway. Not Jim Artist gives the very clever advice: never read the comments. That is true. I've started. I read the comments on all of my YouTube videos because there's usually one max, and so occasionally I get 3 or 4, and I feel very special. And they're all very kind people, being nice. And occasionally they are spam bots, which are whatever, neither nice nor mean. They're robots. But the larger amounts of comments that we get on the State of Decay 2 stream, I usually don't read any of those. Occasionally I'll see a couple of the early ones and I'll respond to them, but mostly I'm just like, some of these are going to be nice, some of them are going to be really cruel, and that's just not what I need right now. Especially like in the wake of when we released Green Zone. There were a lot of very angry people about, who were mad that we made a mode for only 25% of our audience, who wanted the Green Zone, instead of the 23% of our audience who wanted a harder difficulty level. You know what? I'm sorry. We've got a broad audience. We're doing our best to make all of them happy. I'm very sorry for a few of you who were upset about it, but I'm sorry. The team that made the Green Zone, they did a lot of really great work, very hard work to make that thing work really well for the people who wanted it. They did an amazing job. They don't deserve to be raked over the coals for that because somebody thought that they should have been doing something else. I'm sorry. They didn't. I helped us. I was one of the people who assigned them to do that job. They didn't choose the job. They did the job really well, and they were the ones who were reading those negative comments. And so it's just not fair, and it's hurtful. And so don't do that stuff. Constructive criticism? Fine. Adopt a neutral emotional tone, talk about the pros and cons, decide you don't think the trade-offs are worth it. That's fine. Express your opinion. Totally cool. Don't hate people. It's just there's no point. Don't insult them. Don't attack them. It's just not necessary. All right, so I'm starting to fall behind on the new comments that are coming in, even as I'm trying to catch up with the old comments. Let's see here. So Ranethcord says, the opinions that I've seen in this game are so wild. It's great, it's terrible, it's video game Schindler's List, gameplay sucks, but story is great, but gameplay sucks, etc. It's just like they're all over the place, right? And the thing is, like, my opinion is all of it's great. But I am, an outlier among a wide variety of different people. But yeah, it's so polarizing. I mean, I guess there are worse things in the world than making something polarizing. It hurts because a lot of the negative attention you get can be really, really difficult. But, I mean, if it's polarized, at least someone cared about it, And especially, if everyone hates it, maybe you made something bad. But if some people love it and some people hate it, then you've made something that matters. And I think that's worth feeling good about. Even if, you have to navigate some really terrible attacks during the initial sort of burst of reactions to it. I think it means you made something powerful, and so I think people should feel proud of that. I think they should treat that as evidence that they've done something good, or at least worthwhile. I'd say something effective and worthwhile. So okay, in response to the things I was saying about frontier justice being a legitimate, justifiable thing. Not Jim Artist says, mercy and compassion are a luxury of a functioning society. And I think that, that is, pragmatically true. That being able to have, a compassionate system of justice and rehabilitation is something that you can have if you have a functioning society. You need a functioning society for it. And when you're in a world like The Last of Us 2, sometimes, harsher solutions are the only thing that works. But you have to be one of the people who is reluctantly using the harsher solutions when you need to, but constantly striving for something better than that. And I think that, like, Jackson, the city of Jackson in The Last of Us 2, really represents that. It represents people who, they recognize the harsh world that they live in. They're not afraid of the fact that sometimes it takes, things like frontier justice to make it work. But they are building a world where that's not necessary, where the bad choices that you make as Ellie or as Tommy, that doesn't mean that you're going to be killed by that society. That means you might lose your marriage. There's a couple people who lost their marriages over this, but they're still welcome back, and that town was still ready to defend them and keep them safe, and support them, give them food. It's like they're not those people are not the rattlers. And it's nice seeing that, while you spend a lot of your time in The Last of Us 2 among the people who have taken this darker path, they've got a beacon of hope in a place like Jackson. And you imagine, maybe Catalina's like Jackson. Maybe there's lots of places like Jackson, and humanity has some hope of bouncing back to something that's more functional and more positive. Awesome Twitch Dude says, the only 10 out of 10 masterpiece is State of Decay 2. So, I'm sorry. When I'm sitting here looking at The Last of Us 2, I can't pretend that my game is perfect. Okay, clearly there's a lot that you could criticize legitimately about State of Decay 2. I feel very lucky that, that we got acquired by Microsoft, and we're basically in a position where supporting State of Decay 2 and continuing to improve it and expand it is something we're allowed to do, because it means we're going to keep making it better over time. And so, by definition, if we're going to keep making it better over time, it is not perfect now. And I'm not going to pretend that it's perfect. I'm very proud of the game. I think that it's trying to do something that I think is really worthwhile. And I think that for some people who are really sort of aligned with the fantasy of the game and really want what it's offering, I think it does succeed on a lot of levels. But it also does not succeed. There's a lot of ways in which it doesn't succeed. But we're pretty open-eyed about that, and we're working on trying to find the most effective ways to take the game in its imperfect state now and bring it closer to that 10 out of 10 that Awesome Twitch Dude is generously willing to give it. Yeah, so Joshua Schluter points out, you can criticize and even harshly criticize a work without being a jerk about it. And it goes without saying that death threats are beyond being a jerk. And like the way that I, approach Mass Effect 3. Like I said, I actually loved a lot about Mass Effect 3 right up until the ending. The ending was the only part I didn't like. But it's possible to say that out loud, to say I didn't like the ending of Mass Effect 3. I don't think anyone from the Mass Effect 3 team, if they were watching this video, would be hurt by me saying that. Would be, because I'm not saying it like I think they're bad people and I think they hurt me and they've done something nasty by making this, horrible, decision or something. Like, it's not a horrible decision. I think they made a very well justified, reasonable, understandable decision, and it didn't. I don't think it panned out right. I think many of them probably agree it didn't pan out right, and I think it doesn't make them bad people. And I think that that I have utmost respect for that entire team and what they were able to pull off. I mean, so many moments in Mass Effect 3 were some best in class moments for me, and I think that they should be extremely proud of the work that they did. And I mean, I've made some really horrible games, but I'm still proud of the things that went well. I mean, we managed, for instance, I worked on Kung Fu Panda 2, the video game, which don't play it. It's horrific. But the situation we were in, where that was during the dying, death rattle of the work for hire kids movie game industry. It was a time when the mobile industry was on the rise, and when it used to be that whenever any kids movie came out, especially kids cartoons, there would always be a bunch of tie-in games, and the purpose of those games was somebody's aunt who doesn't know anything about video games, but they know that little Susie and Johnny love their video games, and so they'll buy a video game with a familiar character on it and give it to the kid for Christmas. And there was a whole industry. One of my colleagues would call that, you could put rocks in a box and people would still buy it because it's got the cartoon characters on the front. And so we would be assigned to make rocks in a box. We would be assigned, we would be given a very small amount of money to make a game based on, I made a game based on Over the Hedge, a game based on Shark Tale, a game based on Samurai Jack, a game based on all of these cartoon characters. And, they would not give us hardly any money. And when I made Kung Fu Panda 2, this was at the end of that industry, when basically people were starting to age up enough that the kids who grew up being given those terrible games and hating them, they grew up and they were having kids of their own. And now the generation of people who were supposed to buy those games now go into that game store knowing those games are all going to be garbage. And they don't buy them. They buy cool games for their nieces and nephews and for their kids. And no one wanted those games anymore, so the budgets were getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And the studio that I worked for eventually got bought by a mobile company, and we got put to work making mobile games because no one wanted those games anymore. And so Kung Fu Panda 2 was the last game of that type that we made. And basically what we found out partway through was not only were we going to get a small budget to make a Kung Fu Panda game, but actually we needed to make 3 distinct games for 3 distinct platforms with completely different control schemes. But the budget wasn't going to get 3 times as big. So we're going to divide the budget in 3 slices and try to make 3 different games on a budget that was too small for one game to start with. We're going to make a game for Kinect, a game for the Wii, a game for Kinect, a game for the PlayStation, and a game for the Wii. Oh no, and also the U-Draw tablet. And so that's 4 platforms, actually. 4 different control methods that we were going to have to support. And it was just an impossible task. And you know what? We shipped all 4 of those games. And they were not good. They all come across as, an early access prototype that was not ready for prime time. Every single one of them comes out that way. But they came out, and they did not get canceled. They did not, fail. And so for me, that was a logistical success that I'm very proud of, that we figured out the right way to cut and slice those games so they could share assets with each other, so that we could make, one set of characters that worked across all the games, even though the combat was different, one set of levels that worked across all the games, even though the mechanics were different, and we were able to pull it off, and that was a win, even though every single one of those games is not a game you want to play. I do not recommend them to anyone, but I'm very proud of the fact that we made them at all. And so, I'm coming from that context, and so anytime I find, a fault or a problem or a flaw in someone else's game, I think back to that. I'm just like, you know what? There is something in this game that those people are very, very proud that they accomplished. And no matter what might be wrong with the game, and no matter, even though if I as a player don't really enjoy it, who cares? They did something great just making that game and getting it on the shelves or getting it into the digital store. That alone is a huge accomplishment, and they should be proud. And so that's why I always have a positive attitude towards other people making games, even if I don't like the games, even if I don't like the final product. Who gives a crap? That's a huge accomplishment, and they should feel good about it. Burnt Toast Pete says, "Rocks in a Box. That game needs to be made." Yeah, I would absolutely love to make a game called Rocks in a Box, just to commemorate my friend. I believe it was my friend Kelly Tiyama who used to say that. So yeah, I would totally check that game out. Let's see here. So yeah, Not Jamarta says, I hate a lot, but I try to turn it into dismissal. I just never interact with them. It's more healthy for me and more and for the world. Yeah, and so no one can help the emotions that well up inside them, right? That just happens to you. That's not a thing you choose. That's a thing that you experience. And so if you hate something, and even if you hate a person, the fact that occurs inside you, that's not your fault. That's not you. That's a thing that's happening to you. You are the part of your mind that decides what to do about it. And so if you decide to just vomit that hate all over everybody around you, then you're the problem. Then you're a bad person. But if what you do is what like Nachimartis is saying here, which is, trying to turn that into something else, either turning it into something positive or even just turning it into something neutral. Just like saying, you know what, I hate this, so I'm not going to think about it anymore because that just makes the world a worse place. That's you deciding to do something good, and that's I wish more people would do that. He says, if State of Decay 2 could find a way for me to off the sheriff from State of Decay 1 a second time, then it would be 10 out of 10. I assume you're talking about Brant's character, Alan. I understand that was pretty... So we actually did. So in State of Decay Lifeline, Brant played another character who also dies, and so you do actually get a chance to kill Brant twice. And so there you go. So mission accomplished. Joshua Schluter says, I can't imagine how bad it was for the knockoff children's movie video games. The games were so small a budget they couldn't even get the rights to the movie they were making a game around. I hadn't even thought about that there are actually, that there are video games out there that have been made that are meant to evoke a sense of familiarity with a popular title, but are not actually that title. That sounds even worse. Though at least, because, at least they are free from one challenge, which is, basically dealing with the licensor's demands. Because a lot of the time, and this is just a very common thing that, again, is perfectly understandable, the people who own a lot of these licenses, they don't know video games very well, and so a lot of times they've got a really powerful like a sort of a lore bible and a style guide for their property, where they say, these are the rules we adhere to when we're making this story, and a lot of those rules are not very friendly to video game mechanics. There's actually, like, for instance, there was somebody I knew who was, negotiating. They owned an intellectual property, and they were negotiating with a game company that wanted to make a game based on that property, and they said, well, the hero of my story never loses, and so you can never depict the hero losing because that would just violate the lore of this story. And and the video game developer was like, we can't not have you lose ever. That's not a thing. Like, you can't have a game where it's impossible for you to lose, or at least fail. Now that's not exactly true. Of course, there are games that are just like life simulators where just things can just go forever. There's games like the LucasArts adventure games where you could stall out, but you couldn't actually fail. And I really always appreciated that. One of my worst experiences actually was when I played, one time I actually played all of Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis right up until the end in one sitting as a kid, just spending all Saturday on it. And I forgot that, LucasArts adventure games generally have no failure state, so it was fine. I forgot that Indiana Jones was an exception. You could lose fights and you could die. And I didn't save all day. And then the very last possible fight, I got killed and I lost the entire day's progress. But yeah, so there are games that you can't lose, but the kind of game we were talking about, the genre we were talking about, doesn't make sense if you can't lose. And so I was sitting there like, you can't actually demand that. That's not a thing. The way that games work, the realities where Ellie gets killed don't happen. It's like, oh, you watch her get killed, and then you reload, and you play the version. The real story of The Last of Us 2 is the one where she doesn't get killed. Is the one where she survives all of those encounters, and she wins every time. That's... Or where Abby wins every time. That's the real story of The Last of Us, of The Last of Us 2. And the branches where she dies and fails, those aren't real. That's the way that's one of the conceits of the video game genre, of the video game medium, I mean. And so, like, but a lot of times people in other media just don't understand that. They don't understand the assumptions that the audience makes and how the medium works. And so they can make demands that just don't make any sense at all. And so having to navigate those when you're trying to make a video game can be really, really tough. So at least folks who make knockoffs, they can do whatever they want. They're making up their version of that IP. Oh, so Nacho Marta says the tie-in games that are direct licenses but don't have the same voices might be the worst. I recall that Iron Man game, from back in the day. Yeah, so that is an issue. A lot of times you just can't, people. There will be a property that's got top-notch actors in it who simply just they do not have the time to be saying the thousands of lines you have to say for a video game in a voice booth. They're like, no, I'm off doing my other movie. You can't just get me into a voice booth whenever you want to. And that completely makes sense. So you get sound-alikes. And there's some sound-alikes out there who are really, really good at imitating certain actors. A lot of actors, actually, a lot of top-flight actors have official sound-alikes who do all of their sound-alike work. And so whenever you sort of say, hey, can I get Robert Downey Jr. or whatever to come be in my game, they'll say like, well, you can have Robert Downey Jr. sound alike. Here's this person. They're very specialized in doing his voice all the time, and then you can get that person. And but it's a very challenging job, and we lucked out. We have our sound alike for Lily in State of Decay 2 is really, really good. We got the same actor to play. To play Sasquatch. That's the same actor across State of Decay 1 and State of Decay 2. But Lily is a different actress, and you totally can't tell. She did an amazing job. And so, yeah, so it's like, that's just, some people are really, really good, but it's really hard, especially if you've got an actor with a really distinctive voice and a really distinctive cadence. It's just hard to do a really accurate feeling impression of them. And so, so that's, that can be really rough. So Raneth Cord is like, that isn't the same Lily? No, the actress who played Lily used to be a local, but she actually moved to Sweden, and she's doing other stuff. Like we tried to get her, but we weren't actually able to sort of coordinate the time to sort of. I don't know. I wasn't involved in this, and so I don't really know the details. I'm probably expressing it wrong, but just logistically we couldn't make it work because she was so far away. And so so we have a different actress playing Lily, and she just did an amazing job, didn't she? It just sounds like Lily. You recognize her voice immediately. She doesn't even have to say, "Hi, it's Lily," and it's her. Burnt Toast Pete said, you mean there are games where everyone isn't Nolan North? Yeah, it's hard to believe, isn't it? Awesome Twitch Dude said, did you voice any characters, Jeff? So no, I am not a very good actor. And so, I mean, I've done some acting, amateur, like dinner theater type stuff before. And I have enthusiasm and stage presence. I'm loud. In fact, I'm probably talking way too loudly now because I just realized I get excited and I start talking really loudly. I gotta bring my voice down because I'm gonna be waking up my entire family. So sorry to any family members who are inconvenienced by me talking so excitedly. But so I'm loud. I've got stage presence. I'm not a great actor. And so me in a sound booth trying to voice a character, you don't actually want that. Brant's a much better actor than I am, and so he's actually able to pull it off. I couldn't pull it off. The only time my voice has been in a game was I made a noise that I think was used as one component in the sounds that some ghost characters made in a game that I worked on. So I think my voice is in there slightly, massively, mixed with other things and massively produced. So my voice is in some game somewhere, but really, the part of my voice that is actually in the games that I've worked on is the way that I write. I've got a certain voice, I'm not very good at sort of writing characters who all have their own distinctive voices, because I kind of always write with this sort of weird self-aware snarky attitude, and just any character I write will have an attitude like that, and so so you can kind of hear my voice in a lot of the game text and a lot of the dialogue in some of the games that I've worked on, but you don't hear my literal voice. So Joshua Schluter says, okay, so you are part ghost, or at least part of a ghost. Yeah, there you go. I'm part of a ghost. That's a little bit, that's closer. Anyway, okay, so we are down at the bottom of the chat. I've probably woken up and bothered my entire family because I just got so excited with this conversation. So I guess we'll wrap this up and we'll actually move on to playing something else that is not The Last of Us. Yeah, I guess I'll just sort of do this as a separate add-on video after the other one. Oh. I have been handed a note.